For the women in the room, what I'm going to say now will be a shock to you, but men's brains are a fairly simple mechanism compared to yours. Looking at brain scans and the way they now reveal how we behave, give some deep insights into our behaviour, particularly into women's intuition, this strange thing that's existed for thousands of years. The first thing you notice about male brains, and when I say male or man or masculine, I'm talking here about most men, most of the time, most of this applies. About 4 out of 5 men across the board, about your average. And most women, most of the time, it mostly applies. There are no absolutes. You can judge which applies to you in your life. Men's brains are more organised. When you scan them, you notice that everything has its place. So if you can picture for this exercise, it's like he's got little rooms all over his head. And each room has at least one major function that works well in isolation of the rest. Women's brains tend to have functions spread more often on both sides, and often front and back. In the case of speech and language, it's both sides, front and back, and at the back. The connecting cord between the left and right, the corpus callosum, on average for a typical woman, runs around 10% thicker physically and carries up to 30% more connections between the left and right. And this gives women what we call a multitasking brain. In simple terms, gentlemen, that means that your typical woman that you would meet in your life can perform somewhere between 2 and 4 simultaneous unrelated tasks. For the women, is this true, yes or no? For example, she can run an internet program, talk on a headset to somebody in a foreign country about an unrelated program, be listening to a third party having a conversation and drinking tea. Multitasking. Now, most men's brains, with less connections and more neater arrangement, can do, and I'll tell you this, they can do one thing at a time. Now, the women in the room, you've heard a man say, look, I can do one thing at a time. He's not being rude, he's being actually correct. Now, he can do it very, very well, by the way. Real well. But one thing. For example, if a typical male pulls over to the side of the road to read a street directory because he's not lost, he's finding a new way. He pulls out his map or directory. What is the first thing most men will do with the radio? They turn it off. Now think about this. He turns the radio off to read a map. Does that make sense to you? Well, if you could scan his brain, you'd probably get a clue to this. He can't operate navigation and hearing simultaneously. He can do one or the other. If he's driving down the motorway and you talk with him, he misses the turn off. On a roundabout you talk, he gets the wrong turn, you get the blame. Now, understanding one thing at a time mentality is a very important key for women to understanding any male in your life. So we're going to talk about excellence in relationships and how well can you sell yourself to other people. And on an increasing basis today, in every business, how often can you sell yourself to the opposite sex? Get cooperation and get a yes to what you propose. Now, this one thing at a time mentality. Most of the men in this room, you've had, from an evolutionary standpoint, a fairly clear job description. Nobody's argued the point until recently. Now, in simple terms, we describe men as lunch chasers. This is your job. For a long time, your job has been to find a target and hit it. So you get up in the morning and off you go looking. So it makes sense that your brain would have evolved with abilities to allow you to pick up a target in the distance, estimate coordinates. How far away is it? How fast is it moving? If I caught this thing, how big would it be when I got there? At the speed I'm going, at this angle, and the angle it's going, how fast do I go to head it off at the pass? How far do I bring my arm back with a rock or stick of this size? And when do I release it at this speed to hit a moving zebra at 50 metres? This is called visual spatial awareness. Now, scans show that it sits for most men in the right part of the brain and across the back, left and right visual brain. It's the #1 brain skill for most men in virtually every culture. Now, it's a skill that most women do not need. The reason being, as the childbearer of this species, your brain is organised for different skills and abilities. Hitting targets, long-distance navigation are not 2 of them. You don't need to be able to do that. You need other things, but they're not 2 of them. So the guy's out there, he hits the target, now he needs to sense north. The purpose of this? To get home. If you're going to be a long-distance navigator, you need to be able to sense direction to get back, otherwise you're a waste of time. So he gets back home with his lunch, throws it down, he lies about how hard it was to catch. And then for the rest of the night, he just gazes in the fire.